This documentary is about intangible cultural heritage and its survival and preservation into the modern world. Whereas archaeology looks at the material remains of the past, intangible cultural heritage refers to those parts which are non-physical and not so easy to save. Intangible cultural heritage refers to elements such as music, song, dance, storytelling, or anything that can be passed on by the oral tradition. This research project into intangible cultural heritage uses the Swedish musical tradition as a case study. This will help us to look more specifically at this area of research, but also enable us to reflect back on our own cultures and the intangible elements that are threatened to us as well. So why is intangible cultural heritage so important? It's important because of its fragile nature and it's so easily lost. In the modern world, to understand where we are and where we're going in the future, we need to understand our past and where we've come from. This can help us to examine and understand where we are now and look at our differences and similarities and celebrate them. This research project took me over to Sweden on a 3-week road trip. I went round 3 wonderful open-air museums, Skansen in Stockholm, Vallby in Västerås and Hällström in Östersund. I'm also grateful to the staff at the museums. Without their help, this project would not have been possible. Whilst on this trip, I had the great privilege to meet a range of traditional musicians who've done a great deal to save the heritage in their local areas. Olle Gällmo, Härdelin and Kjell-Erik from Hällström, Josefina Paulson, Hällström, Lisa Gerholm, Norudde, Folke Dahlgren, Göran Hallmarken, Christina Holmström. I interviewed these musicians at the museums because I wanted to combine the visual and the audible elements together. Through this research project, we looked at several major areas of the Swedish musical tradition and how they have been saved. This includes traditional fiddle playing, the Nyckelharpa, which is a keyed fiddle, the Swedish bagpipe, Kulning, which is a vocal technique, the Sami ritual drum, and the medieval ballads. I've included musical instruments as part of this research project because it is the social and cultural context which is the intangible element that concerns us here. This project has no major external funding. It's the product of our combined enthusiasm and wish to present this subject as honestly as possible. Sit back, absorb yourself and enjoy. My first stopping point was in Stockholm, where I stayed in Skansen, which is the oldest open-air museum in the world. It was opened by the legendary Arthur Hazelius in 1891. It contains a huge range of buildings representing Swedish architectural heritage. The oldest building dates back to the 13th century, and the buildings range from the modest farm dwellings to the stately homes and even a full-sized cinema. Whilst at Skansen, I had the privilege of meeting a well-respected fiddle player by the name of Hällström. He's a Riksspelman, which is a highly esteemed award given to musicians who have to undergo an assessment of their skills. This tradition was originally started in Skansen in the 1920s and was aimed at fiddle players initially, but is developed in recent years to include other instruments. Anders is a perfect example of this living tradition and how it has continued into the modern world. So, how did you first encounter traditional Swedish music?
It was a coincidence. I had a new neighbor who was very old when I was 10 years old in 1975, who visited us for the first time. He had a long beard, long hair, and was dressed in old-style clothes. He was living with with one foot in the 16th century and the other in the 17th.
Wow.
So he was a very old-fashioned guy.
And do you find that you still hold that music that comes from your home area to your heart, or do you play more widely?
But I discovered very much from other areas, very lovely tunes. In the 80s, I went to a course in Malmö with a teacher, Johnny Soling, and we gathered from all over the country, so we learned each other's tunes of that course at that camp, and it was fascinating. So there are a lot of good tunes from a lot of good areas here in Sweden. I have been playing very much from northern Sweden, from Jämtland, Medelpad, Ångermanland, Västerbotten, Norrbotten, the upper half of Sweden.
Yes.
And of course that camp was in Dahlgren, so I have learned a few Dahlgren tunes too.
You sound very proud of your musical heritage.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. And I have played a lot to dance too, folk dance troops up in Norrbotten. Didn't have a lot of musicians to choose, so I was glad to play.
Yeah. How lovely. Thank you. Lisa is playing an instrument called the Nyckelharpa, which means keyed fiddle. It is an important instrument in Sweden and recognised as part of its musical heritage. It has had to undergo many changes over the centuries in order to survive into the modern world. Whilst I was in Stockholm, I was able to visit the museum stores in Tumba for the Museum of Performing Arts to look at their extensive Nyckelharpa collection. This collection covers the full range of styles and developments of the instrument over the centuries, and it does include some very interesting, unique designs. The basic name for this style of instrument is known as the harpa, and there are many variations that have developed over the centuries. The oldest depiction of a harpa is a carving in the Kulning church in Gotland from about 1350. There are other examples of this instrument in Norway and other areas of Sweden. The earliest version is known as the Morra-harpa, as this was found in the one version of this instrument that survives today was found in Morra in Dalarna in Sweden. And there's another style known as the Essa-harpa, which was discovered in Norway, and this style has continued into the modern day and looks very similar to the modern harpas that people play today. The Morra-harpa is believed to date from around 1526. And the one full surviving example hangs in the Zorn Museum in Morra. Very excitingly, I managed to find a version of this instrument in the Tumba Museum stores. This one has lost its key box on the front, but the actual main body of the instrument survives perfectly intact. The modern three-rowed chromatic Nyckelharpa that is popular today in Sweden has its origins in the early 20th century. It was originally developed by a chap called August Bolin in 1926. A very significant Nyckelharpa player at the time was called Erik Hällström, and he has become revered and very well known for the work that he did in order to save this instrument. He took this development that August Bolin had started in order to make it a far more playable and usable instrument in the modern times. Erik was also a very great player and composed many tunes that are still around with us today, and his influence is very much still alive and resonates through the instrument and its survival into the modern world. The Sami are indigenous people of an area covering northern Sweden, Norway and parts of Finland. Their land is known as Sápmi. Their history has been one of persecution and survival. One of the most enduring and potent symbols of this struggle is the Sami drum. The important distinction to make here is that the drum is not a musical instrument. It is a significant and important spiritual tool. It is a spiritual tool that is used by the Sami shaman to enter trance states in order to gain information that can be used by the wider community, either for looking into the future or for healings. So this drum is used to help the shaman enter these trance states. The early Christianisation of the Sami was one of assimilation initially, but it quickly turned to zero tolerance. Either the Sami threw away their drums and their old beliefs, or they would be killed. The persecution of 1723, their drums were gathered up and burned. Today only 71 drums have survived. 36 of these are kept at the Nordiska Museum in Stockholm. I was also lucky enough to be able to view a book by Ernest Manka, which was written in the 1930s on all of the surviving drums. This was a huge piece of work and a massive undertaking by Manka. He examined and recorded the details of all of these surviving drums. There are various designs of these drums, but there's two main ways that they're constructed. The southern style is made from an oval hoop with a crossbar handle at the back. In the north, they would hollow out a lump of birdwood into a bowl shape and then stretch the skin over the open bowl. The drums are decorated with important spiritual symbols and also everyday representations of their lives. The paintings on the front will vary in their design. Some of them are heliocentric, that means having a sun in the middle radiating out with the symbols spaced around. Other drums have levels, almost looks floors of a building, but these are actually the three worlds which the Sami shaman will enter. We can learn a lot by looking at these symbols and trying to understand them. These drums that have survived, that I had the privilege of seeing, all would have predated the 1723 persecution, so they are at least as old as that, but very likely much older indeed. One of the ones I saw had been stabbed in the middle. We believe that this was because the shaman believed that by stabbing the drum, it was taking away its energy. Judging by the importance these instruments would have had to the Sami people, disfiguring the drum in that way would have been a very, very difficult thing for them to do. In modern times, the Sami have looked to regain their identity and to bring themselves back from this persecution. The drum has become an important symbol in this survival and this reaffirming of their identity. So this is very more than a musical instrument in many ways. It is an important spiritual tool, and it's also a very important symbol of their struggle for survival in the modern world. The thing that started me onto this area of research was my discovery that the Swedish bagpipe, which is a very unique instrument to Sweden, was relatively unknown amongst the general population. It has a very haunting, beautiful sound. Its survival has been down to a handful of researchers who've held on to its last threads. The survival of the instrument was so tentative that there was only one piper left, Gudmunds Nils Larsson, in the 1940s. He was not a professional piper, but he was the last living tradition of this instrument. It was down to a researcher called Mats Renberg, who had written a dissertation on the instrument in the 1930s. At the same time, a teacher called Tur Gudmundsson made a version of Larsson's bagpipe and recorded 2 tunes for the national radio. Outside of this, the instrument remained silent for the next few decades. It was not until the 1970s and 80s that Leif Erikson worked with a fiddle player called Per Gudmundsson to make a reliable instrument that could be used in modern settings. Alterations were needed from the surviving examples that have been found in museums to make them usable in the modern world. This included adjusting the chanter scale, making the drone tunable, which it wasn't initially. These alterations may not be historically accurate, but they have enabled the instrument to survive into the modern world. This highlights the importance of the continuation of the living tradition. If something ceases to exist, then in the future we are resuscitating something from the past and adding our own modern filters and values onto it. When something ceases to exist as a living tradition, an important part of its authenticity is lost. Of course, things evolve, but the essence of the cultural value it held would still remain in some form. Once it is gone, it is something we can never properly regain. The Swedish bagpipe is a perfect example of this situation. Whilst I was in Skansen, I had the great pleasure to meet up with Olle Gällmo, a respected Swedish bagpipe player. Olle has been an important ambassador for the instrument and helped to bring it to the attention of the general public.
Olle, thank you for coming along today. The first thing I wanted to ask is, how did you first discover the bagpipes? What was the draw for you?
To explain that, I think I have to go back a little bit before then, because I have been performing music since I was a small kid, but other forms of music. I was a pianist, and I was a classical pianist, and a trumpeter in some big bands and things like that. And I was had sung a lot in choirs. But through my youth, I've always been interested in all instruments. So I kind of collected them in as far as my financial status allowed me. I collected some odd instruments and learned to play them. So I played a lot of strange things. And then when I was working at the university department, where my daytime job still is, there was a student beginning the education there who played Swedish bagpipes. I was very surprised that there was a Swedish bagpipe, because as everyone else, I had never heard of it. So it was really the oddity of it that attracted me the first time.
Yes.
And I had to get one, just as I got my musical saw or my slide trumpet, or things, odd instruments.
Yes.
So I got one, and I learned to play it, and I played together with this student, and therefore also discovered Swedish traditional music. Most other Swedish bagpipers, they have been into Swedish traditional music before they discovered the bagpipes. They were perhaps playing the fiddle or something, and then discovered the Swedish bagpipe, but they already knew about the Swedish traditional music. But I kind of discovered both at once. So my life changed overnight, so to speak, because it wasn't overnight, but in that moment, that year, my musical life changed completely.
Yes.
Particular that attracted me to the traditional music side of it, disregarding the instrument, was the freedom of it. Being a classical musician, I was very bound by what's on the paper, and a lot of people that know that this is the right way of doing things, or playing things, or singing things, and so on. While this was traditional music, where it's more free in that sense, more improvisation. Swedish traditional music is very improvised. In their style is very improvised. And also this instrument had essentially died out, so there was no people could say that this is how they were played in the old days, or that gave me a lot of freedom. a lot of musical and creative freedom.
I've realised that the Swedish bagpipes aren't so well known, or don't seem to be so well known, well known in a popular level. How's your experience been? Do you find that they're kind of fairly obscure in the public knowledge, or do you find most people know of them?
They definitely do not know them, and but I think this is a common problem in all over the world. I think that the bagpipes are associated to Scotland, yes. Because Scotland happened to be a part of the British Empire at the time when they were at the peak, and at the same time the bagpipes were losing the battle with the fiddles and the accordions in the 19th century in all the other countries in the world. So the Scottish bagpipes became the norm, so to speak, or the most common. So I think this is true in all of the bagpiping countries. Almost all the European countries have a bagpipe tradition or have had a bagpipe tradition. Yes. Many of them have resurrected them and restored bagpipes, but it's still the case that all of us have to explain to our own citizens or our fellow Swedes or Germans or French what this instrument is, and is it even a bagpipe if it's not from Scotland, and so on. So I think this is a common problem everywhere.
So with the music that you play on the pipes, do you think it's versatile, or do you still find some people think you should play music from certain areas on the pipe to keep with its tradition? Or
well, it's not versatile from a technical perspective because it has a very narrow range.
Sure.
And it's not chromatic, so of course it limits a lot, and that's also one of the attractions of the instrument. Actually, its limitations makes it an interesting challenge to play some tunes, and some tunes have to be remade to fit the pipes. But from a music style perspective, I really have no inhibitions, I think.
Okay.
I do feel that it is important to be aware of and to play the old music as well, but that doesn't stop me from doing other stuff.
Of course, yes.
So I do feel free to do that.
Yes, sir.
Before leaving Stockholm, I had one final meeting. It was a privilege to meet up with a musician by the name of Göran Hallmarken. Göran is an accomplished hurdy-gurdy player. He's also a singer and plays the Swedish bagpipes. We spoke about the Swedish medieval ballads and their survival into the modern days.
Jag har mig en fager ungersvän och skulle rida till Hova. Rider jag ut om en aftonstund, lägger mig i lunden att sova. Sedan jag henne först såg.
Well, how did you first encounter the medieval ballads themselves?
I think it was my first hurdy-gurdy teacher, since of course I played the hurdy-gurdy. He was singing a song, and that was pretty fantastic because I only found that the typical European early music, like those things in other languages. Yeah. But when I took hurdy-gurdy lessons from him, he also said, but there's lots of medieval ballads in Sweden. And I go like, what? Is there? That's fantastic. And then he sang a couple of them. I didn't place it so much in my head that it was Swedish. But later I know that he gave me the little red threads so that I could follow where it was. Yes, and it was just many more threads and just expanding. There was a risk of losing him. I think that, and if you look at an international scale, of course, when you talk about Sussex, I would say that we know that, like Shirley Collins, from of course, she went over to the US and collected stuff as early as also these times, and it's a kind of pre Bob Dylan revival of the folk scene.
Absolutely.
So the recordings in the first half of the about from 1960 up to 1960 is a very important pre-collection of anything you could record. There is like wax rolls, the wax rolls, like fiddles, and also music, and there is, and then of course the recorder, the difficult recording device from 1950s, 60s. But I think there was a big chance of losing it as a result of course, the industrialization, people moving into the city. It was not so important to have them out in the countryside so much. That was really the time when you start to lose it. So these people, they saved it. And then in the last century, they start to record stuff. So they mainly find old men and old ladies who have melodies in tradition.
Yes.
And there's a lot of field recordings of these persons, and it's lovely. And one female, her name was Martha Ramsten. She was exceptionally good at recording stuff in 1957. So she found some really old women who were really good at remembering old songs. But the melody can also have been changed during times. And she got these people at a proper, very, very good moments, because she already felt at that point that sometimes the old women had put the old text to melodies they heard on the radio.
Right.
So there you have really this situation where you have a breaking point. If we had done it in the 70s, they would not have been remembering as they were, but as, something influenced by the radio, of course, and put into another melody. We also say that the Swedish medieval ballads are pretty safe in being medieval.
Yes.
Because of course, the very, very late time where the medieval times end, and also there is just not so much influence from other parts of the region. There is a strange country called Denmark, blocking, and there is a sea making travels up and down, not much possible. And then, of course, somewhere in the 1750s something, we start being very much friends with the French, Napoleon and stuff. And all the courts and all the people in Sweden wants to have France as they learn French. They want to have French parties. They want to have French music. So you have a change also there in how very many of the melodies change.
Right.
So then it becomes another thing. So that's the two really main things. And of course, after and then nothing more else happens until about the records starting coming in industrialization and so on.
Right.
In the 70s, we have a band much like the Still Lifes band.
Oh yeah.
And the Swedish equivalent to that is called folk och rackare. Folk och rackare.
Right.
That you should ask me later about the name, because they did very many of the typical. They did what Still Lifes band did.
Yes. Yeah.
So Garmarna took influence from them.
Right. Okay.
So there was like vänner och fränder lade om råd hur de skulle gifta bort sin fränka i år. That's recorded in 1957.
That's I remember hearing that.
By Marta Damsten. Folk och rackare takes it up in the 70s, and of course in the 90s Garmarna takes it up. And it is that and one other song is the two songs right now which every band wanting to be in this pagan medieval German scene, they need to have one of those tunes on their repertoire because everybody's asking for them. Yes.
Would you say that they're particularly popular now?
It is very marginal, I would say, but there is now a subculture that is not connected to folk music. It's a subculture like our reenactors.
Yeah.
And also the other type of reenactors, the so-called LARPers, the live-action role players.
Yes. Yeah.
For those subcultures, they are very important. Okay. You saw the Vikings that came in here,
Of
and
course,
exactly. That's a Viking subculture. There's a medieval subculture. There is a LARP subculture, and for all of these that are very they are very important. That's what you're seeing around the fireplace, because you don't allow mobile phones, and not even guitars. They try to collect their instruments, so for them it's very important.
Den ene klappar mig på min kind, andra visk i mitt öra. Satt upp Fagerungers vän, om du lyster älskog pröva.
After leaving the bustle of Stockholm, I moved on to the tranquil countryside setting of Vallby Museum near Västerås. The museum was founded in 1921 and was built next to a Viking burial mound. It has around 50 buildings in its collection. The buildings have a wonderful charm about them, and it reminded me greatly of the Wilden Downland Museum where I work in England. It was in this beautiful setting that I met up with Josefina Paulson, an extremely well-known and accomplished Nyckelharpa player. I had the opportunity to talk to her about her views on the survival of this wonderful instrument. Hey Josefina, thank you for coming along today.
Thank
you. The first question, could I just ask you how you first discovered the Nyckelharpa, and how did it make you feel when you first heard it?
Well, I was lucky because we had it in the music school, or the cultural school, in my county here in Västmanland. From the very start, I think it was just, well, of course, it looks very strange. So
Yes.
I think that just caught my eye, of course. But it has a big sound, and when I got to try it, it also gives a lot of vibration. So the feeling of playing the Nyckelharpa is quite amazing. You have it just right connected to your body, so all the sound goes straight into your body, and I think that was maybe more than the sound actually from the beginning.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
Yes.
feel very passionate about this music because it's good music, and also because it's not been so widely spread. It's not a lot of people that know about music from Västmanland.
Yes.
So I have like a mission to give that out to the world. Also, the more you travel, I think, the more you meet people from other areas, you realize the treasure you have in your own music.
There was a development of the fourth row of keys. Have you?
Yes.
That was. I thought the Nyckelharpa itself had enough range to me. Have you tried one, and how do you see modern developments like that?
I think it's just a part of a folk instrument.
Yeah.
Is supposed to keep on living.
Yes.
And then it has to develop.
Yeah.
Like this instrument has the same range as a violin, with a bass string. And obviously, if you have a bass string, you start thinking about how would it be if I had some keys on this one as well.
Yes.
And then I think that's a lovely thing with the fact that it is a folk instrument, and people have been thinking a lot about how can I do more of this throughout history. I mean, coming from being a small thing without resonating strings, sympathetic strings, with just one row, and then with double connected key leaves to the keys, and then one at the, it's just the way it's always been.
It will probably continue.
I think so, yeah. I mean, this tenor, harpa, octave, like the bass kind of instrument, and there's so many versions. I think it's a great thing.
Yeah. But do you think that the Nyckelharpa as an instrument is growing in popularity, or do you think it's something at the moment that still needs a lot of encouragement?
It grows, absolutely. And outside Sweden, a lot. Yes. I have people coming over from Germany each summer used to have lessons about the Västmanland tunes on the Nyckelharpa and things like that. I've traveled to Australia. I have people there that play the Nyckelharpa.
Wow.
We've been to Japan. There's a big community playing Bund Polska, and I've never heard it anywhere outside Sweden played like that.
Yeah.
It's like a very strong movement right now.
Yes.
And I think it has to do with that it's very accessible. You can play the Nyckelharpa and get to quite a good level quite fast. You can play melodies quite easily, I shouldn't say, but kind of easy, thanks to the keyboard. And then you just have to figure out the rest, and then you're there. You can play along with other people.
Whilst at Vallby Museum, I also had the great privilege of meeting up with Folke Dahlgren, who's a very accomplished Swedish bagpiper. Folke is also a riksspelman on the bagpipe. Folke gave his views on the Swedish musical tradition and the survival of the instrument. Do you think the bagpipe is growing in popularity? Do you think it's decreasing in Sweden at the moment? How do you feel? Because there's in some other countries, for example, we have some people in England that have taken it up, and it's only very small, but there seems to be a lot of foreign interest as well in the pipe.
Yes, that's my feeling also. I wouldn't say it's on the decline here in Sweden. I don't think so.
No.
When I'm speaking to my builder friend who's built these pipes, he gets a lot of orders from Swedes as well as people from other countries. So I think it's and with the social media, people are popping up that knows how to play and can see things. It gets out there more than it could do before. So I don't think so. I actually think it's gaining in popularity.
Yeah, good. Yes.
Even slow. Even if it's slow, I think there are interests. People are getting interested in it.
About you saying being a Riksspelman. How did that come about? And I understand the background from those, but obviously I'm not aware of how you came about it.
Yeah, well, you play for a jury and they kind of judge your musicality, your traditionalism, really. Hard to judge.
Personal view, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, very much so. But I think what they're after is that they want to see if you have the tradition. I think that's what they're after, to see if you have a connection with the tradition or if you're just good at playing. So they want both. I think that's what they're
right.
after.
It must be very nerve-wracking, because that doesn't sound like the sort of test I think I would serve very well at.
No, it's not. I was nervous, all right. A tune, a hambo or hamburgska, written down after Axel Inge, and he got it from the bagpiper Erik Persa from North, I think.
Do you have any particular style you play, or do you find that any folk music, Swedish folk music, you play along to, is there any certain dances or certain things you think suit the bagpipe better than others? Or is it wider than that?
For me, it's wider. I know some. You can argue about the traditions like Swedish, Scottish, kind of modern style tunes. Some people think they aren't suitable to play on the bagpipe, and the more I try not to limit myself, but since it's very limited in range, it also limits the tunes you can play unless you rearrange, and which I do also sometimes if I find tunes that kind of let them be rearranged. But the most the tunes that are most comfortable are often old style polskas and stuff like that, because they are limited in range, and they kind of fit.
Yes,
straight up.
Yeah.
Maybe one or two notes that doesn't fit, but then it's nothing.
Nothing too, not too much to worry about.
You can always work around that. If it's one note up or down, you can kind of cheat around to get it to sound okay with another tone. That's
So do you, I'm just wondering, what sort of places do you play? Do you find you're playing concerts, or are they demonstrations where you're explaining the pipes? Well, just trying to get an idea of the certain places you find yourself playing.
I play mostly concerts, and lately I've been enjoying playing for dancing.
Right.
It's really, really nice, because you get immediate feedback on what you're doing, and it kind of sets the music in a bigger perspective.
Yes.
Music is fine by itself, but it's another thing when you include the element of dance, because then it gets something else.
Absolutely.
The interconnection between dancers and playing, I like it.
It was a pastoral tradition in Sweden for the women to take the cattle up into the mountains during the summer months. They would live in relative isolation in these communities known as Fäbod for months at a time. These Fäbod communities would develop their own very specific traditions, and some of these were musical ones. On one hand, there was the Fäbod songs that they would sing, and also there is a vocal technique known as Kulning. Kulning is very specific to this area of Sweden, but it has its distant links to something like yodeling, I guess, in some way. Kulning would be used to call the cattle in at the end of the day. It is a very high-pitched form of communication, and it's a wonder to see it in action, because the cattle come from wherever they are drawn and mesmerised by the sound, and they will come in to the person doing the singing. My first encounter with this style of vocal tradition was actually through the musical tradition of Swedish folk musicians actually turning this Kulning sound into music. It was so haunting and beautiful that I felt a need to come and research this further. Whilst at Vallby Museum, I met up with Christina Hällström, who performs Kulning singing and these Fäbod songs. She was able to demonstrate to me some of these techniques for Kulning and also to sing some of the Fäbod songs themselves. So here is an example of one of the Fäbod songs. And here are some of the Kulning techniques that would use to call in the cattle. These Kulning techniques could also be used as communication, so that people could communicate across the valleys.
So then you can say like this. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Ticka, 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 ticka. Prr, bä. Prr, bä. Prra, säger. You also have a up.
So Kulning had a number of elements that it could be used for. In modern times, Kulning has made its way into the Swedish folk musical tradition, and this is where I first heard it and was drawn towards it. It came to my attention that these Fäbod communities were in decline. With industrialisation and people migrating towards the cities, a lot of this lifestyle of the Fäbod communities was in decline and close to extinction. There are a number of singers that have brought this tradition back to life and are promoting it within Sweden.
Mina jätter går i skogen, 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 mina jätter går i skogen. Men jag tror det att varje gång.
So may I ask, what do you focus on these days? Obviously you do your violin making and repair. Is there what sort of music do you involve yourself with today?
It's I have a lot of projects all the time.
Yes.
The healing at time was the one thing.
Yes.
I was a simple fiddler who in this group, and another person was another thing in this group, and today I'm a simple fiddler too. But I make own tunes, and I digging old music from this area here, and
yes.
so on, and try to learn more about it.
Yeah.
And you find new things all time, old say drawings, old descriptions,
yes,
notes, and so on, and try to learn these tunes and so on.
Right, brilliant. So you're always still as intrigued by the traditional music as you always were.
That was the beginning of everything.
Yes.
And Hedninga sounds very modern, but we play all time traditional tunes, or melodies was traditional, or we had make them ourselves. The important thing there was we don't use drum set, we don't use electric bass, we don't use electric guitar. The sound sometimes was distorted, or some. It was the lute.
Yes. Right.
And perhaps the bagpipe, and we have these simple string drums and so on. There were no modern instruments. Where I grew up was this iron factory.
Yes.
A small town. And the folk music, the traditional folk music died out very early in this area because the industrialism and so on coming in. But the old Swedish music I been in contact with the first time perhaps when I was 18. I have already this time played electric guitar in 3 years, and I was 15 and I was start to play guitar by myself. And I start to play folk tunes on my electric guitar, and I know there were an old violin after my grandfather. I take this instrument and try to play, and after a while I sold off my electric guitar. I play only violin. I was very interested of old folk music in Sweden. When I was 21, I bought a Swedish bagpipe and make some flutes by myself of plastic to imitate the sounds I heard them. 20 when I was make the first bowed lyre of masonite and simple wood pieces and so on.
So you started making instruments quite early on in your interest?
In my 20s,
yes.
I was 20 around.
Yeah.
And in this time there were no internet, and you had to try look in books and borrow books and make connection with other people in another way.
Yeah.
And discovered more of these instruments. It was in Dalarna in Sweden.
Right, yes.
The place there was a very strong folk music tradition. And after a while I've been a multi-music musician with folk music instruments.
Yes. Yeah. So do you feel that Dalarna has been a very strong centre for keeping this tradition
in a
alive?
way, but only there are not so much of these old folk music instruments. There are very few who play the cow-horn, and very few who play the thing I love.
Yes.
But I play the fiddle too. And I was the man who played a lot of instruments this time. Young. In 94, we have a gig in a festival. Suddenly, a man come up on the stage and yoiking, fake a microphone and yoiking. Whoa, who is that? It was Wilmer Sari. And at the same time we are thinking about him. We should try to do something with him.
Yes.
And we love the yoiking and the Samic way too.
Would you say that the traditional music is on a decline, a drop? Or would you see that even though there's not many people, do you think it's more in the time that you've been playing, have you seen a wider audience listening and maybe playing, or do you think it is just a few limited people that still keep that tradition?
Yeah, yes, it's that way. And some of the people, they only want to play the best tune from this place and this place in Sweden, and don't think about how to save the local folk music.
Yes, yeah.
There are very few who want to work with to save the local music.
Yes, yeah.
In here, where I live, the longer you go out to the forests and the villages, there were more left. You can find more people who remember the tunes and so on, but very few play.
Yes.
I also met two members from Triakel, Kjell-Erik and Emma Härdelin. Triakel released their first album in 1998. They research and play old traditional tunes, largely from the Jämtland area where they are based. Emma is also the singer in Garmana, who have been hugely influential in bringing old traditional tunes, including the medieval ballads, to a wider audience. Both bands have made a significant contribution to saving traditional songs that otherwise would have remained obscure and eventually lost.
Yeah, the medieval ballads that we do in Triakel, we actually found them on written paper. Like somebody handed us a small dot book that a man had. He was not a musician from the start. A geolog. What's that in
collecting stones?
Yeah, he was like looking up stones
right.
all over Sweden, I think. But then when he was here in Jämtland, his name was Carl Bolin, and he was writing down music that he heard, and this was around 1880. So he wrote down the music that he heard in the villages and made a little book of it. And we got that book from a friend of ours, and so that's where we found our first medieval ballads. And so I guess that if he hadn't been writing them down, they would have not existed any longer.
Yes.
And I mean, we were like more than 100 years later than that he did the book.
Yeah.
So we were very lucky to be able to do these songs.
For me, it was the start when I started to be interested in the folk music. So I was looking for something around where I live, and for me it was also very interested, and I was curious about my past. You know, who has lived here before, and you know, so the music for me was very important that I found the music from this area. Nowadays, it's yeah, of course, music is still important that way, but it's not so important anymore for me. Now, with music, I can play music from other places, and I love them as well. So I just love good music. But I think it's for many people, I think it's important to know their history.
Yes.
And to find themselves in the history. And of course, the music was from this area is not maybe just only from this area. It's imported from other places. You know,
yes.
Music has been traveling, as you said. We have the same medieval ballads in England and America, and so the music has always been traveling around.
Yes.
But for me, it has always been interesting and important that I know a lot of things about the music. It's not just music. You know who played it before and what they were dancing and how they were living, and you know that. You know.
realized that this is something special. If people hadn't started to write them down and to later record old people, they wouldn't be left now, I think. Maybe some. But, I mean, it feels like we are the generation that almost missed the old ones.
Yes.
So if there would have been much fewer people knowing them now, but we are lucky, we can go to the archives and we can listen to these old people even though we hadn't the chance to meet them. And I think it's still important to bring it out and to sing it and keep it and dance to it or whatever you want to do with it.
Just as long as you use it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Jag älskar den jag ej kan få. Så vitt i världen vankar och städse sörja må. Så orsaken där till om jag dig aldrig skådat ditt ansikte, ditt öga blått, så
This documentary has shown a fascinating example of the survival of intangible cultural heritage into the modern world, using Swedish musical tradition as a case study. But this is not a passive documentary, it's a call to action. We can all do something to try and save the heritage in our local area, the things that mean something to us that are so easily lost. So what can you do yourself? It could be as simple as taking those old family photographs and making sure that your children know who the people are in them. If you're a young child, you could maybe ask your parents to explain that to you, or maybe to tell you some stories about their background. Other things you could do could include maybe buying something from a traditional craftsperson, going to a local folk gig, or maybe going to your local museum and finding about the heritage in your immediate area. All of these are ways that you can do something yourself. So what will you do? The most important thing is not to do nothing. There's so much to explore, discover and to preserve. Thank you for watching.
Vänner och fränder lade om råd hur de skulle gifta bort sin fränka i år ut i rosen. Lade om råd hur de skulle gifta bort sin fränka i år.
Dig vill vi giva en tunga sån till man, och han har mera guld än lille Roland över land ut i rosen. En tunga sån till man, och han har mera guld än lille Roland över land. Om lördagen och söndagen budet ut gick, om måndagen och tisdagen skulle skådas vad hon fick ut i rosen. Budet ut gick, om måndagen och tisdagen skulle skådas vad hon fick. Om onsdagen och torsdagen landades vin, om fredagen och lördagen väl sedersdagen min ut i rosen. Blandades vin, om fredagen och lördagen väl sedersdagen min. Det drucko i dagar, det drucko i två, men inte ville bruden åt sängarna gå ut i rosen. Det drucko i två, men inte ville bruden åt sängarna gå. Det drucko i dagar, det drucko i tre, men inte ville bruden åt sängarna se ut i rosen. Det drucko i tre, men inte ville bruden åt sängarna se. Då kom där in en liten sjödräng, och han var klädd ut i blå skjortelen ut i rosen. En liten sjödräng, och han var klädd ut i blå skjortelen. Han ställde sig vid bordet, han talade så: jag ser endast masterna som där går ut i rosen. Talade så: jag ser endast masterna som där går.